Have you ever witnessed a moment so unfair, so riddled with prejudice, that you couldn't believe your eyes? Imagine being on a flight where a seemingly insignificant request turns into a storm of disrespect. Picture a flight attendant brimming with confidence and a hint of arrogance rolling her eyes at a polite black man who dares ask for a simple favor. Little does she know that same passenger holds the power to determine her fate and the airline's reputation. In today's story, we delve deep into the drama revealing shocking twists and the hard-hitting karma that awaits the unwary flight attendant. Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta International Airport buzzed with activity even before the first hint of sunrise. Cleaning crews wheeled their carts through the wide corridors, concession staff readied coffee stands and breakfast stations, and a light hum of conversation began to swell among the earliest travelers. Outside, a line of cars and taxis piled up at the drop-off point. Red taillights shimmered in the pre-dawn darkness, and the rattle of rolling luggage over concrete signaled the day was about to begin. Fiona Green, a flight attendant for a major airline, let's call it Delta Airlines to anchor this story, in reality stepped out of her rideshare car, pulling her overnight bag behind her. She was in her late 20s, tall with neatly braided hair pinned back into a corporate-friendly bun. Her crisp navy blue uniform was pressed to perfection. A Delta emblem sat proudly on her blazer lapel. Despite her professional appearance, a glimmer in her eye suggested a certain impatience simmering below the surface. Fiona was running on 4 hours of sleep after a late arrival from the night before. She stifled a yawn as she checked her schedule on her phone. Flight 285 from Atlanta to New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport, departing at 7:00 a.m. A relatively short flight, well under 2 hours in the air. But as Fiona knew, short flights could sometimes be the most challenging rapid turnaround limited time for in-flight service and a cabin full of morning commuters who demanded coffee and comfort. She joined the line at the security checkpoint reserved for flight crews. One of her colleagues, a chatty young attendant named Melissa, waved to her. "Morning, Fiona. Ready for the rush?" Melissa asked, her smile bright even at this hour. "As ready as I'll ever be," Fiona replied. "I just hope this flight isn't too full." Melissa laughed. "It's going to New York. It's always full. Hang in there." Fiona let out a small sigh. She wasn't in the best mood. Sleep deprivation always put her on edge. She reminded herself that soon she'd have a day off in New York to rest. But first she had to handle a cabin full of passengers expecting polished service. Once through security, Fiona and Melissa headed for the crew lounge. They'd done dozens of flights together, but not exactly as friends. Melissa was warm-hearted, always eager to help, while Fiona found small talk tedious. Today would be no different. Fiona would do her job politely, if somewhat mechanically ensuring coffee cups never ran empty. She hoped to avoid any drama. Little did she know, drama was about to find her. Fiona had only been flying for 3 years, but her ambition soared higher than the planes she serviced. She longed to climb the ranks within the airline, perhaps become a purser, then move into management. In her mind, serving drinks at 35,000 feet was only a stepping stone. She prided herself on her uniform's sharpness, her ability to fake a cordial smile, and her talent for handling difficult passengers swiftly. Deep down, though, Fiona had a serious weakness. She judged people far too quickly. She often let her personal biases slip through her polished demeanor. While she was never openly rude, subtle signals, a raised eyebrow, a quick roll of the eyes, a dismissive tone could speak volumes. In her experience, many passengers never noticed these tiny gestures. They were simply too busy or too stressed. but all it took was one discerning person in the right position to catch those little slights and report them. Fiona understood that fact, yet she often brushed it off. After all, in her mind, the passenger was just a customer, and she was the face of the airline. In the crew lounge, she tapped her manicured nails against a small table as she scanned the flight roster. She took note of a name scribbled by the scheduling manager, Marcus Greenfield. The name didn't ring any bells. Possibly an air marshal, possibly a VIP. She couldn't be certain, and nothing indicated a special passenger. With a shrug, she shoved the roster into her purse. Melissa returned from the coffee station, a to-go cup in each hand. "Here you go," she chirped, handing one to Fiona. Fiona nodded in thanks, but stared at the swirl of coffee. The lounge's overhead speakers announced the final boarding call for an earlier flight. The day was definitely in motion. Finishing her coffee, Fiona insisted on heading to the gate early to prepare. She needed a few minutes of peace before greeting the inevitable rush of bleary-eyed travelers boarding for New York. Meanwhile, Marcus Greenfield stood near gate B28, leaning against the wall with a travel bag at his feet. He wore a neatly pressed suit jacket over a casual shirt. His posture was confident, but his demeanor was humble. Though he was set to fly as an ordinary passenger, his job behind the scenes held much more weight. Marcus was an airline inspector, contracted by a federal authority to ensure compliance and quality within commercial airlines. His role involved random spot checks, evaluating everything from maintenance procedures to cabin crew behavior. He specifically picked this Delta flight because he had received a tip about subpar customer service on certain routes. His mission was to see if those rumors held water. On top of everything, he was African American, something that he'd sadly noticed sometimes caused flight attendants to adopt a certain tone or attitude. Through countless flights, he'd learned to remain polite and calm, making careful mental notes whenever he encountered discriminatory microaggressions. This morning, the concourse was bustling families, business travelers, and solo adventurers jockeyed for position near the gate. Marcus shifted his gaze to the digital screen displaying Flight 285's status. It was on time. Perfect. He had to be on high alert from the moment he boarded. The real question was whether the crew, particularly the flight attendants, would treat him with respect, or if their biases might slip out. Marcus believed in giving everyone a fair chance. He never relished writing negative reports. If the cabin crew did their job properly, he'd be happy to commend them. But if they displayed prejudice or a lack of professionalism, his pen would reflect the truth. After all, the safety, reputation, and fairness of commercial aviation hinged on thorough oversight. He double-checked his ticket, though he knew his seat by heart. 12C, an aisle seat in economy. Not a VIP seat, not an exit row, just a normal spot. He wanted to see how standard passengers were treated. An efficient flight attendant could turn a passenger's day around. An indifferent or rude one could ruin it. Fiona and Melissa made their final checks in the aircraft cabin. Fiona scrutinized the overhead compartments, gently pushing them to ensure they latched properly. She tested the PA system. "Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is your flight attendant." Fiona speaking. Everything seemed in order. Passengers started trickling in. Business travelers in suits, hurrying to stow their carry-ons. Parents with small children clutching stuffed toys. College students with bulky backpacks that barely fit in overhead bins. Fiona offered brief smiles, nodded politely, and directed people to their seats. Melissa handled a couple of early seat mix-ups with her trademark warmth. Soon Marcus boarded. He blended in with the line of passengers, wearing a calm, confident expression. With a gracious nod, he stepped toward Fiona to quickly confirm he was heading the correct way. "Good morning," he greeted softly. "Is row 12 down this aisle?" Fiona glanced at his boarding pass. She gave a thin, automatic smile. "Yes, continue straight until you see the row numbers. 12C will be on your right." She barely made eye contact. To her, he was just another passenger. Marcus thanked her and proceeded to his seat. He watched her from the corner of his eye, noting her cool demeanor. She wasn't exactly rude, but there was a certain perfunctory air about her. Once seated, Marcus placed his bag under the seat in front of him. He had a small notepad tucked in his pocket, but he wouldn't take it out until after takeoff. He always tried to blend in seamlessly, so as not to reveal his role. Boarding continued. One particularly stressed passenger, a middle-aged woman with a large tote bag and a child trailing behind, seemed confused about seat assignments. She approached Fiona, who exhaled quietly, her patience already tested. "Excuse me," the woman began. "I have 14B, but my son is 14C, is that?" "Please check the overhead sign." Fiona cut in, trying to disguise her impatience. The seat letters are indicated above each row. The woman smiled apologetically, but Fiona's dismissive tone stung. Melissa, overhearing, stepped in and politely guided the woman to her seat. Marcus took note of the flight attendant's contrasting styles. He felt a twinge of concern but remained neutral in his observations. Eventually the boarding doors closed, and the final seatbelt click echoed through the cabin. The plane backed away from the gate, and the flight crew initiated safety demonstrations. Fiona stood in the aisle, mechanically going through the motions as the pre-recorded announcement played seatbelt instructions, oxygen masks, life vests. Marcus observed her posture and facial expressions. She was methodical, but the sparkle of genuine care was missing. After takeoff, the plane climbed steadily. Morning light poured through the windows, illuminating the cabin. Passengers relaxed into their seats, some scrolling on phones, others flipping through in-flight magazines. Fiona and Melissa began their service routine, rolling the beverage cart down the aisle. Melissa started from the front, Fiona from the back. They would meet in the middle. Fiona handed out napkins and snacks, peanuts, pretzels, or cookies. She also took drink orders, but her energy flagged. She wished she'd had a stronger cup of coffee. Marcus, seated near the front of Fiona's half of the cabin, waited patiently for his turn. He noticed she paused to chat politely with a few passengers, perhaps older men in suits or well-dressed women. When she arrived at his row, her tone felt more clipped. "Would you like a beverage?" she asked without looking directly at him. "Yes, please. May I have some water?" Fiona placed a small plastic cup on his tray table and poured water. Marcus could sense her detachment. He remained pleasant, thanking her politely. As she moved on, he made a mental note. No direct rudeness yet, but an unwelcoming aura. The mild tension in the cabin grew when a problem occurred in row 20. A teenage girl had dropped her phone between the seat cushions. Panicked, she pressed the call button. Melissa responded quickly, kneeling down to help the teen retrieve it. Meanwhile, a grumpy passenger on row 19 complained loudly about the seat recline. Fiona, forced to address him, showed open exasperation. She rolled her eyes as she turned away from him, an expression Marcus spotted from his vantage point. Strike one, Marcus thought. Eye-rolling at a passenger was a clear sign of disrespect, even if the passenger was being difficult. He jotted a short note in his pad, discreetly F.A. rolling eyes. Unprofessional. As the plane cruised, Fiona passed by row 12 again. Marcus politely signaled her with a small wave. She paused, arching an eyebrow. Yes. Could I have another cup of water, please? He asked. Her eyes flickered with annoyance, as though he were asking for something monumental. She sighed. All right. One moment, she said, turning on her heel. She reappeared a minute later, thrusting the plastic cup forward. Here, she said, barely masking her impatience. Thank you, Marcus replied, maintaining composure. He watched her move on down the aisle, greeting a well-dressed elderly couple with a far warmer expression. Marcus felt a pang of sadness. He was used to subtle biases. Growing up, he'd experienced all shades of discrimination, from overt hostility to these microaggressions. He remained level-headed. He'd see how the rest of the flight played out. Perhaps she was simply stressed. But stress is never an excuse for discriminatory behavior, he reminded himself. About 30 minutes into the flight, the captain's voice crackled over the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're encountering some mild turbulence ahead. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. The seatbelt sign illuminated. Fiona and Melissa secured their carts and took their seats in the jump seats. The plane began to shake gently. Over the next few minutes, the turbulence intensified, jostling the overhead bins. Nervous murmurs rippled through the cabin. Marcus, who had flown more times than he could count, remained calm. He noticed Fiona huff, bracing herself. It seemed she hated turbulence. For a moment, her facade of poise cracked, replaced by genuine anxiety. He almost felt sympathy. Yet he still remembered her exasperation at him for wanting water. The plane rocked again, and a small cry was heard from a row behind him. A passenger, evidently prone to motion sickness, rummaged frantically for an air sickness bag. Another passenger pressed the call button. Both Fiona and Melissa were strapped in, though. Normally, flight attendants are not allowed to move about during severe turbulence. Eventually, after about 15 minutes, the turbulence subsided. The seatbelt sign switched off. Fiona and Melissa rose to address the calls. A young woman had vomited into a bag. She looked mortified. Melissa hurried to help, offering tissues, a fresh bag, and a kind word. Fiona lingered, complaining under her breath about the smell. She tossed a blanket to Melissa to place over the mess until they could clean properly. Marcus observed it all. Fiona was playing by the book, fulfilling the bare minimum of her duties, but where Melissa showed empathy, Fiona displayed impatience. The contrast was stark. As an inspector, Marcus knew both skill and empathy factored heavily into passenger service standards. Just as the cabin relaxed again, an elderly gentleman in row 15 began to feel unwell. His wife, worried, alerted Melissa that he was short of breath. This was a critical moment for any flight attendant, a possible medical emergency at 30,000 feet. Melissa promptly grabbed the interphone and relayed the situation to the cockpit, requesting an onboard medical kit. Fiona joined Melissa but carried a look that said she'd rather be anywhere else. She followed procedure, asking the man to describe his symptoms. Marcus watched closely, aware that how they handled a medical situation could make or break the flight's entire operation. The man's face appeared pale, and he clutched his chest. "I have a heart condition," he rasped. Melissa's eyes widened. She grabbed the emergency oxygen. Fiona fetched the medical kit with curt efficiency. As Melissa administered oxygen and comforted the passenger, Fiona's attempts at compassion came off as stiff. She attempted to reassure him, but her voice lacked warmth. The man's wife was frantic, tears welling. Fiona tried to remain calm, but an underlying tension marred her expression. Marcus couldn't intervene medically. He wasn't a doctor, but he offered moral support. Leaning across the aisle, he gave the man's wife a comforting nod. "He'll be all right. They're doing their best," he said gently. In that moment, Fiona shot him a subtle scowl, as if irritated he'd involved himself. It disappeared as quickly as it came, but Marcus had already seen it. Amazingly, a doctor happened to be on board, and he stepped forward. Fiona stood aside, letting him examine the passenger. The man's condition stabilized enough to continue the flight, though the captain decided to contact ground medical services so they could meet them upon arrival. As the situation diffused, Fiona offered a half-hearted, "Glad you're feeling better," and turned away. Melissa stayed to reassure the couple. Marcus recorded his observations. Fiona, minimal empathy, borderline hostile reaction to passenger reassurance. Unprofessional attitude. He'd seen enough to suspect a systemic issue with her approach to service. In the aftermath of the medical scare, the flight continued its approach to New York. Marcus decided he wanted to test Fiona's responsiveness one more time. Not to be cruel, but to see if she'd maintain a professional standard under repeated requests. He pressed the call button. Fiona arrived, her forced smile barely stretching her lips. "Yes," she said, arms folded. Marcus could feel her tension. "I'd like another cup of water, please," he requested calmly. Fiona exhaled sharply through her nose, and her eyes rolled upward for just a split second. But it was enough. The gesture screamed, "Ugh, this again." She then caught herself quickly adopting a neutral face. "Sure," she said, curtly. She stormed off and returned with the water. Marcus thanked her once more, but her reaction left a bitter taste in his mouth. The flight attendant had shown disdain, not once, not twice, but multiple times. He'd been a model passenger, polite and unobtrusive. Her condescension was entirely unprovoked, and it spoke volumes about her attitude. Before long, the captain announced the start of the descent into JFK. Passengers buckled in windows revealed patchy clouds drifting over the tri-state area. Fiona and Melissa prepared the cabin for landing, ensuring seatbacks were upright trays stowed. The man who had the health scare was stable, though he'd need medical attention on the ground. Fiona breezed past Marcus, collecting any remaining trash. She avoided eye contact. He suspected she was annoyed by his water requests, but little did she know the gravity of those interactions. As an inspector, Marcus had documented every subtle sign of prejudice and disrespect he'd encountered. In a typical flight, an inspector might remain anonymous. However, given the severity of Fiona's repeated microaggressions, Marcus already knew he'd be filing a comprehensive report. Possibly he'd need to speak to the airline's supervisory staff upon landing. Her behavior didn't only reflect poorly on her, but also tarnished the airline's reputation if left unchecked. The stakes were high for Fiona, though she remained unaware. The seatbelt sign flickered on, and the captain's calm voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are beginning our initial descent into New York's JFK Airport. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and your tray tables are stowed." The cabin buzzed with the soft rustle of movement, passengers adjusting their seats, pulling blankets tighter, preparing for landing. Fiona walked briskly down the aisle, glancing at each row to ensure compliance with safety procedures. Her polished shoes clicked softly against the narrow aisle floor. Her lips pulled into a perfunctory smile that had grown more strained with every mile. She stopped briefly by Marcus's row, not making eye contact, and picked up an empty cup from his tray table with a muted, "Thank you." Her hands moved automatically like a machine, trained efficient, but utterly detached. Marcus observed her one last time. There was no warmth in her voice, no genuine acknowledgement. Only the lingering tension of someone who'd written him off as a nuisance. And she had no idea. The plane touched down smoothly, the wheels screeching lightly against the tarmac, before settling into a steady roll. Fiona gripped the jump seat strap with a sigh of relief, whispering a tired "finally" under her breath. From her point of view, it had been an unusually stressful flight. Turbulence, a medical scare, a passenger she thought was intentionally needy. She couldn't wait to get off the plane, decompress, and perhaps grab a latte before her hotel shuttle. In the first-class cabin, Melissa glanced back toward Fiona with a soft expression. "You good?" she mouthed. Fiona nodded, but her shoulders were tight. The plane came to a halt at the gate, and the seatbelt sign chimed off. Passengers leapt into motion, reaching for bags, stretching legs, chattering about connections and weather. Fiona stood at the front exit, her hands clasped in front of her, reciting the company line in a steady loop. "Thank you for flying with us today. Have a wonderful day. Thanks for choosing Delta." It came out of her mouth like clockwork, each repetition more hollow than the last. Marcus remained seated intentionally, allowing most passengers to disembark before him. He watched as people filtered past Fiona, some offering smiles, some ignoring her entirely. She nodded politely to each, never once suspecting the impact one specific passenger was about to have. When Marcus finally rose and stepped into the aisle, Fiona glanced up just enough to see his face. He smiled politely and said, "Thank you for your service." Fiona nodded, expression unreadable, eager to get through the last few passengers. She turned her attention back to a woman fumbling with a suitcase overhead. Marcus exited the plane and stepped into the jet bridge, where a ground agent stood waiting with a clipboard. As he approached, he discreetly reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a slim leather wallet, flashing his official inspector badge. The agent's eyes widened slightly instantly, straightening her posture. "Mr. Greenfield," she said in a hushed, respectful tone. "Yes, sir. What can I do for you?" "I need to speak with a flight supervisor," he replied calmly. "Preferably someone who oversees cabin crew conduct. It's a matter that requires immediate attention." The agent nodded quickly. "Of course. Follow me, please." They walked briskly through the terminal, bypassing families lugging suitcases and business travelers barking into phones. Marcus's steps were steady, deliberate. He wasn't angry. He never let emotions dictate his professionalism. But he was resolute. What he had witnessed on the flight wasn't just a bad day or a tired crew member. It was a pattern of behavior that needed addressing. Eye-rolling, disrespect, selective courtesy, and he wasn't going to let it slide. The ground agent led him to a small glass-walled operations office near baggage claim. Inside sat April Hernandez, the flight service manager on duty, a seasoned woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and the poise of someone who'd managed 1,000 mid-air crises and 100 employee reviews. Marcus stepped in, introduced himself, and explained the situation. April listened carefully, asking only a few clarifying questions before her expression grew serious. "Would you mind waiting here while I bring in the crew?" she asked. "Of course," Marcus replied, settling into a chair. He placed his notepad on the table beside him, its pages marked with discreet but damning observations. Back on the aircraft, Fiona and Melissa had just finished their post-flight checks when the gate agent reappeared. She stepped onto the plane, her tone neutral but firm. "Fiona Green, Melissa Jones. Could you both please come with me? The flight supervisor would like to speak with you." Fiona looked up, puzzled. "Is this about the elderly passenger? We already filled out the incident form." The agent gave a polite, tight smile. "I'm not sure. I was only asked to bring you to the office." Fiona shrugged, somewhat irritated, but not alarmed. She slung her bag over her shoulder, calling over her shoulder to Melissa. Let's get this over with. The walk to the office felt longer than expected. Melissa glanced at Fiona a few times, sensing her mood darkening. Maybe it's just paperwork, she whispered. Or someone griping about turbulence, Fiona muttered. Or that guy asking for water every 5 minutes. He only asked twice, Melissa said gently. It felt like 5, Fiona snapped. As they reached the office, the door opened, and Fiona froze. Sitting calmly at the small conference table was Marcus. Her stomach dropped. She blinked once slowly as recognition dawned. Why is he here? April's tone was professional but cool. Fiona Green, Melissa Jones. This is Mr. Marcus Greenfield. He is an independent inspector for the Federal Aviation Compliance Board. Fiona's mouth opened slightly. She felt the blood drain from her face. The polished words, the snide comments, the eye rolls. It all came rushing back like a wave crashing over her chest. He's an inspector, she repeated faintly. Marcus stood and offered a curt nod. Yes, I flew on your flight this morning. I've been observing service quality professionalism and behavior across the airline's routes. April gestured for them to sit. Mr. Greenfield has some concerns about the flight. We'd like to discuss them now. Fiona moved stiffly to the chair. Her legs felt like concrete. This couldn't be happening. The one passenger she'd brushed off, the man she'd rolled her eyes at, he was the one person who had the power to end her career. Melissa sat beside her, glancing back and forth between Fiona and Marcus, clearly confused but trying to stay composed. Inside Fiona's mind, panic and shame collided in full force. Her heart thundered in her ears. She thought she'd made it through another flight. She thought she could move on with her day. But now, with Marcus seated just feet away, not as a passenger, but as a powerful observer, she realized the truth. This was no ordinary complaint. This was Judgment Day. The room was quiet, save for the faint hum of air conditioning. Fiona sat in the small chair across from Marcus and April, her posture stiff, hands clenched in her lap. Her navy blue uniform, once a source of pride, now felt like a costume she was trapped in. Her face, usually composed, showed the faintest flicker of dread. April Hernandez. The veteran flight supervisor folded her hands on the table. She didn't look angry, but her no-nonsense demeanor sent a clear message. This wasn't a routine check-in. Fiona. She began carefully. Mr. Greenfield has provided a preliminary report based on today's flight. Before we go into specifics, I want to make it clear this is a professional discussion. Our goal is transparency and accountability. Fiona gave a stiff nod. Her throat was dry, but she managed a hoarse, "Of course." Melissa sat beside her, straight-backed but calm. She was still piecing everything together. Her eyes flicked from Marcus to Fiona, then back to April. Marcus, still composed and professional, pulled out his notepad and opened it slowly. He didn't gloat. His voice when he spoke was calm, almost gentle, but every word carried weight. First, I want to acknowledge that the medical situation during the flight was handled with procedural correctness. That's important, he said, looking at both attendants. And for that, you both deserve credit. Responding to emergencies is no small thing. Fiona's shoulders relaxed a fraction. But then he continued. However, he said, turning a page, there were recurring issues of unprofessional behavior from Ms. Green throughout the flight. These included tone of voice, lack of warmth, impatience, and on multiple occasions, visible eye-rolling and body language that reflected disdain or disregard. Fiona's mouth opened, but no words came out at first. She blinked rapidly, flustered. "I see," she stammered. "Could you be more specific?" Marcus kept his tone even. "Certainly. The first instance occurred during boarding when I asked a simple question about my seat location. Your reply was technically accurate, but the tone was clipped. You didn't make eye contact. You spoke as though I were an inconvenience." Fiona tried to compose herself. "I didn't mean to be rude. I was just focused on getting everyone seated quickly." "I understand," Marcus replied. "But intent doesn't always align with impact." He flipped the page. "The second incident happened mid-flight when I requested a second cup of water. You gave it to me." "Yes, but the way you did, rolling your eyes, sighing audibly, was not only unnecessary, but inappropriate for someone in a customer service role." Melissa glanced sideways at Fiona. She hadn't seen that specific moment, but now, in hindsight, it didn't surprise her. "I was tired," Fiona said, her voice quieter now. "And we'd just come out of turbulence. I didn't mean anything by it." April interjected gently but firmly. "Tired or not, Fiona, every passenger deserves professional courtesy, especially during short-haul flights where expectations for service are compressed into a tight window. Our job is to keep that standard high consistently." Marcus gave a slow nod. In isolation, I might have dismissed those gestures as stress. But then I watched how you interacted with other passengers, particularly those who were older, well-dressed, or more visibly affluent. Your tone changed. Your face lit up. There was a clear disparity in the way you treated different people. Fiona's cheeks flushed. "I didn't notice. I didn't mean to discriminate." "No one's accusing you of overt racism," Marcus clarified. "But microaggressions can be just as damaging, especially when repeated. It wasn't just me. There was a woman with a child during boarding. You cut her off mid-question and redirected her abruptly. Meanwhile, your colleague Ms. Jones stepped in with kindness." Melissa shifted in her chair, uneasy. She didn't want to throw Fiona under the bus. But the truth was the truth. Marcus continued. "Then there was your reaction to the medical emergency. You followed protocol, yes, but your demeanor lacked empathy. Your colleague stayed by the passenger's wife, comforting her. You, on the other hand, made a comment about the smell and handed off a blanket with clear irritation. That's not the level of service this airline is known for." Fiona lowered her eyes, now fully aware that this wasn't a few minor complaints. It was a pattern. "I didn't think anyone noticed," she said quietly, almost to herself. Marcus looked at her, not with anger, but with the same look a teacher gives a student who could do better. "Passengers notice more than you think. Some stay silent. Some complain. I'm here to represent the ones who walk away feeling unseen, disrespected, or dismissed for no good reason." April leaned forward. "Greenfield's observations will go into an official report. And I'll be honest with you, Fiona, we've received a few passenger complaints about your tone and body language on prior flights. Nothing major, but enough to raise a flag. This corroborates those concerns." Fiona's voice cracked slightly. "I didn't realize it had gotten this bad." "I believe you," Marcus said simply. "But intention doesn't erase behavior. You had a chance to make each interaction better. Instead, you let your fatigue and your assumptions guide you." "I'm not biased," Fiona blurted, almost defensively. Marcus held up a hand. "I'm not labeling you. I'm giving you a mirror. What you choose to see in it is up to you." April spoke again, her tone calm but final. "Fiona, we're placing you on administrative review. There will be an internal investigation, and you may be subject to additional training or disciplinary action depending on the findings. You'll also be temporarily removed from flight duties. Fiona's shoulders slumped. The words hit her like turbulence, unexpected, disorienting. For a moment, the room spun. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist. This could be the end of everything she'd worked toward. I understand, she whispered. Her eyes stung, but she refused to cry. Melissa placed a gentle hand on Fiona's arm. We all have off days, she said softly. But if it's more than that, if there's a pattern, it's time to look inward. Marcus stood. I don't enjoy writing negative reports, but passengers, especially those from marginalized backgrounds, deserve respect, even when they ask for water twice. He gave Fiona a nod. Not cruel, not triumphant, but solemn. Then he turned to April. Thank you for your time. I trust you'll take the necessary steps. April stood as well. We will. As Marcus exited the room, Fiona sat motionless, her thoughts a whirlwind of shame, fear, and dawning realization. Somewhere in her gut, she knew he was right, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a professional. She felt like someone who needed to change. Following the meeting, April asked Fiona to wait outside while she discussed details with Marcus and Melissa. Fiona's nerves were rattled. She paced the hallway, replaying every moment of the flight. Why had she allowed her frustration to show? She couldn't deny that she'd singled out certain passengers unconsciously or not, because she found them more demanding. She recalled that her mother, who was African American herself, had long warned her about prejudice in service industries, advising her to guard against internalizing negative stereotypes. Now she was on the receiving end of a formal complaint that could derail her future. After about 15 agonizing minutes, Melissa stepped out and squeezed Fiona's arm reassuringly before leaving. Then April called Fiona back in. Fiona, April began. Mr. Greenfield has decided to file an official report on this incident. We have zero tolerance for unprofessional behavior, especially if it appears targeted. We'll need you to undergo additional training, and we're considering a temporary suspension of flight duties pending the investigation. Fiona's eyes welled up. Suspension. Her heart felt like it might burst. This was the karma she never saw coming. All her subtle slights, the eye rolls she'd dismissed as harmless, now it all threatened to crumble her career. April offered a firm but gentle nod. Yes, you'll be on unpaid leave while we finalize this review. If the findings confirm Mr. Greenfield's account, we may extend that leave or pursue other disciplinary actions. If you show genuine commitment to improvement, you might return to flight duty. Fiona opened her mouth, but no words came. She felt numb. She'd built her identity around being a polished, up-and-coming flight attendant. Now it felt like the rug had been pulled from under her. And for what? An inability to manage her bias and frustration. Marcus, still in the room, looked at Fiona. He was not gloating. Instead, his eyes showed a stern compassion. I'm sorry it had to come to this, Ms. Green. I sincerely hope you learn from it. The airline industry is about service, safety, and respect. Fiona could only nod, tears brimming. She mustered a wavering whisper, "I understand." In the following days, Fiona found herself in a haze of regret. She stayed in a small hotel room near JFK while awaiting the formal notice. The airline offered to fly her back to her base in Atlanta, but she chose to remain temporarily in New York. Something about being away from home forced her to reflect deeply. She sat in that cramped room, looking over the city skyline each evening, replaying the flight in her mind. She remembered how she'd felt annoyance at Marcus's simple requests for water requests that in her exhaustion she'd interpreted as unnecessary demands. If only I'd responded with the same courtesy I gave other passengers. The difference in how she treated him was stark, and now she had to admit it. She'd singled him out for her short temper, quite possibly due to internalized biases or stereotypical expectations that he might be difficult. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his inspections on other flights, fulfilling his professional duty. He hoped that the airline would handle Fiona's case responsibly. He didn't relish punishing individuals, but he strongly believed in accountability. Word traveled among the flight crew. Some sympathized with Fiona, thinking the punishment might be too harsh. Others believed it was time someone faced real consequences for microaggressions. Melissa felt torn. She liked Fiona, but couldn't deny Fiona's attitude was a recurring problem. In the end, Melissa offered to help Fiona with supportive words, encouraging her to complete the diversity and customer service training the airline mandated. Fiona sat in her small hotel room near JFK, staring blankly at the television as a muted news anchor moved soundlessly across the screen. Days had passed since her meeting with April and Marcus, yet the weight of that conversation still lingered in her chest like a lead balloon. She had been placed on unpaid leave, pending investigation, and ordered to undergo sensitivity training. Her schedule, once filled with back-to-back flights and tight layovers, was now empty. The stillness was deafening. She checked her phone obsessively, hoping for updates, dreading what might come next. The airline hadn't contacted her with any final decision yet, but deep down, Fiona sensed that the worst might still be ahead. She had tried to push away the fear, telling herself it was just a misunderstanding, that she'd had a rough day. But the more she reflected, the harder it became to deny the truth. Her behavior hadn't just been unprofessional. It had been hurtful, dismissive, and for reasons she was only now beginning to confront deeply personal. Then came the shock. A week into the investigation, Fiona received an email from Human Resources marked "Confidential Additional Feedback." She hesitated before opening it. Her fingers hovered over the trackpad, heart pounding. When she finally clicked, the message revealed something that made her blood run cold. More complaints had surfaced. Apparently, following Marcus's report, the airline had sent out anonymous feedback forms to passengers on several of Fiona's past flights. Flights she had long forgotten. The goal was to determine whether her behavior on the JFK-bound flight was isolated or part of a pattern. The responses spoke volumes. Several passengers recalled feeling dismissed, talked down to, or ignored. A black mother traveling alone with 2 young children had described Fiona as cold and visibly irritated when asked for help with overhead luggage. Another elderly man said, Fiona never smiled at him once, but lit up for others sitting nearby. One comment stood out painfully. She acted like my presence annoyed her before I even said a word. Fiona sat frozen, rereading the feedback until the words blurred. Her chest ached with the sting of recognition. These weren't made-up stories. They weren't exaggerations. They were proof that what Marcus experienced wasn't an isolated incident, but the tip of a much deeper problem. And it got more complicated. In a follow-up meeting with HR, Fiona was asked to explain some of her behavior, not just during the Marcus flight, but over time. In that sterile office with a glass of water sweating on the desk beside her, Fiona admitted something she'd never told anyone at the airline. She had changed her last name. Born Fiona Green, she had added the E upon entering the airline industry. It was subtle but deliberate, a way to create a more professional-sounding identity. She had believed, perhaps naively, that it would make a difference on job applications or help her blend into corporate culture more easily. But beneath that change was something darker. A lifetime of memories of being labeled, stereotyped, judged. As a child growing up in Birmingham, Alabama, Fiona had endured subtle racism in classrooms and open hostility from adults who assumed things about her because of her skin. She had been called too loud, too angry, too difficult. Somewhere along the way, she had begun to internalize those messages. She had learned to hide her frustration, to perform professionalism like armor. But in doing so, she had turned that armor into a weapon wielded ironically against people who reminded her of herself. That realization hit her harder than Marcus's report ever could. She hadn't set out to mistreat anyone. But through exhaustion, bitterness, and a misplaced sense of superiority, she had become the kind of person she used to fear encountering as a child, dismissive, impatient, aloof. It wasn't about race alone. It was about how she had begun to view humanity itself through a lens of judgment. She had lost compassion, and now she was paying the price. Despite the damning complaints, the airline decided not to fire Fiona immediately. Instead, HR saw an opportunity not just for discipline, but for change. They laid out a strict improvement plan: mandatory sensitivity, training psychological evaluation, a 6-month probation period, and surprise mystery passenger evaluations that would monitor her performance going forward. If she slipped up again, the next action would be termination. Fiona signed the paperwork with a trembling hand. Not because she resented it, but because for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Accountable. She folded the papers, tucked them into her handbag, and left the office with a heavy heart. But a small flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, she still had a chance to make it right. A month passed. Fiona, suspended without pay, used her time to attend every training session, workshop, and counseling appointment offered by the airline. She confronted her own biases, recalling how she'd ironically become an oppressor of sorts, despite once being marginalized herself. The process was painful, but each day she gained new insights. Marcus was updated on Fiona's progress. The airline invited him to speak about improving passenger experience from his perspective, and he agreed. He delivered a short session to flight attendants about unconscious bias, microaggressions, and the importance of empathy. Fiona sat in the back of that session, listening intently, tears forming in her eyes as she realized the weight of the harm she'd caused. She mustered the courage to approach Marcus afterward. "Mr. Greenfield," she began softly, "I owe you a personal apology. You didn't deserve the attitude I gave you. No one does." Marcus studied her face, seeing genuine remorse. "Thank you, Ms. Green. Apology accepted. I hope this experience pushes you to become a better flight attendant and a better person." She let out a shaky sigh of relief. "I can't change the past, but I'll do all I can to ensure I never treat anyone that way again." After several more weeks, Fiona was reinstated on a probationary basis. Her first flight back was a short route from Atlanta to Charlotte. She felt a swirl of nerves as she donned her uniform. Questions raced through her mind. Will I slip up? Will passengers see me differently, determined to prove her growth? She offered a warm greeting to each passenger during boarding, maintaining genuine eye contact. Among the passengers was an African-American father traveling with his young son. They needed help stowing a large backpack. In the past, Fiona might have rolled her eyes. Now she stepped forward with an open smile. "Let me assist you," she said, carefully lifting the backpack into the overhead bin. The father thanked her, and his son beamed. Throughout the flight, Fiona remained vigilant about her tone, her facial expressions, and her body language. She reminded herself every passenger deserves respect. By the time they landed, her attitude had improved so much that a passenger complimented her to the airline on social media. Meanwhile, Marcus continued his inspections on random flights across the country. It was months before they crossed paths again. When they did, it was on a flight from Atlanta to Dallas, and Fiona was part of the cabin crew. This time, Fiona smiled with genuine warmth when she noticed him. She asked how he was doing and offered him a drink politely. No eye rolls, no dismissive tone, just a flight attendant doing her job with kindness. At the end of the flight, Marcus approached Fiona as the cabin emptied. "You seem changed," he said, a small grin tugging at his lips. "I am," she replied, voice steady. "And I'm still changing, growing. Thank you for holding me accountable." Marcus gave her a nod. "Accountability is important, but so is grace. I hope you continue on this path." In the months that followed, Fiona became an unexpected champion for improved service standards. She shared her story anonymously in training sessions, cautioning new flight attendants that small gestures of disrespect could have massive repercussions. She openly discussed the damaging effect of unconscious biases, urging others to look inward before treating a passenger poorly. Delta Airlines took note of Fiona's transformation, not as a PR stunt, but as an example of how discipline, education, and second chances can foster real change. Fiona's flight supervisor, April, monitored her closely. Over time, Fiona received favorable evaluations. Passengers left positive feedback, praising her attentiveness and warmth. The old Fiona was gone, replaced by a professional who understood that genuine care was as essential as safety instructions. Marcus, meanwhile, updated his final report, noting that Fiona had made a remarkable turnaround. The airline posted improved ratings on passenger satisfaction surveys on the routes she staffed. He made sure to highlight that her success story was a testament to the power of constructive feedback and thorough oversight. Karma had hit Fiona hard, forcing her to confront her flaws, yet it also gave her an opportunity to rise above them. She still wrestled with internal biases. Years of ingrained judgments don't vanish overnight, but each day, she chose to do better one passenger interaction at a time. In the end, Fiona's story became somewhat legendary among the airline's employees. It served as a cautionary tale about the hidden power each passenger holds and the responsibility every flight attendant carries. And for Marcus, it reaffirmed his belief in the dual power of accountability and compassion. After all, the goal wasn't to ruin careers, but to ensure that airline travel, an everyday occurrence for millions, remained a respectful, dignified experience for all. Thank you for joining us on this dramatic journey. We witnessed how a few subtle gestures could spark a wave of repercussions, ultimately revealing the powerful hand of fate. Fiona's eye roll at a polite black man sparked a chain reaction she never imagined. Yet through this tense spiral of events, we learned that while karma is swift, redemption is possible. Under scrutiny from an unexpected airline inspector, Fiona faced the hardest wake-up call of her life, one that transformed her attitude and revived her sense of empathy. Now we'd love to hear your thoughts. Was Fiona's comeuppance justified? Did the airline handle it correctly? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. Share it with your friends who love a good real-life drama, and be sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another captivating story. Until next time, Fly safe and treat everyone with respect.